All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. Tyler Gray is a man whose identity has always been in the military, initially anyway. Now he's forging a new identity, and his book, Forged in Chaos, A Warrior's Origin Story, is going to be out next month in July. Pre-order now. That's what you do. You go to Amazon or any place you get books and you pre-order the book. He's co-authored this book with Lauren Ungeldy. I believe I'm saying her name right. And she's done great work as well. She's done a lot of books. So I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. And I look forward to actually talking with her about that. And welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast, Tyler Gray. Let's get a look at your book. And Forged in Chaos, that's a pretty badass photo right there. That's really neat.
Thank
I like
you.
it.
Yeah, I give full credit, to two people, the designer, Ben Sledge, who's actually a Marine veteran, but that photo, using a close-up photo, was actually Lauren's idea. I did not want to do it. Just felt very shameless to have my face on the cover, and Lauren's like, oh, I think we need a close-up photo. And finally I was like, all right, well, what about this one? And then there you go. So, it is what it is. But
there's the old photog, rule that you have to see the eyes or it's not a photo kind of a deal, as you would know now.
Yeah, she was right. I resisted for months, and then, she and actually others who supported the idea won out. So, I think it looks good. It just, it's hard to get used to having your face on, it just, seems self-serving or, I
know. You are a pretty self-deprecating guy, so.
Well, I try and, not take myself too seriously, and I'm hyper aware of all the mistakes I make and all the things I mess up. So it's hard to not be sometimes.
One of the things I wanted to ask you right out of the chute, because you are now a director and you've done some directing, you've done some acting. And when did you discover that you were an artist? Because as I saw you on the Sean Ryan podcast, I said to myself, this guy's he's an artist. He speaks like a person in the arts. So talk to me about that, if you would, please, as we begin our conversation.
Yeah. I think it's a good question in the sense that I don't know when the exact moment that I discovered it was. I can tell you for me, and a lot of people ask me about how I got into the entertainment industry. And for me, I was lucky in the sense that the only two things I wanted to do as a kid, and I mean, going back to, third grade, was be in the military and work in entertainment. And so when one ended, when my military career ended, I had an obvious choice of what I wanted to do next, which was my other passion. So to directly answer your question, I think I always felt like an artist, but I didn't realize that I was one, if that makes sense. I didn't really accept that. I didn't know what it was, if that makes sense. I didn't know when I was younger, I didn't realize that what I wanted to do was tell stories. I didn't know I wanted to direct. I didn't know I wanted to write. I just knew I wanted to make movies, but it took me a while to put the connection that was really so intrinsic in my nature.
Yeah, well, it seems to me, in fact, I want to find out from you what happened to your best friends, Gage and DeSoto, because it seems to me that was your time that you began your storytelling, eh?
Yeah, and again, it as you said, it's just funny because now now I look back, or doing the process of the book, you look back and you see things that were always there. You just didn't see them for what they were at the time. And so, I absolutely credit the imaginary friends that I created, which is really, as creating or forging, for lack of a better term, my creative imagination. Gosh, that's the word I'm looking for. So I've spent so much time alone, and so much time, for lack of a better term, trying to escape, kind of loneliness, or, those things I felt as a kid, isolation, etc., that I created those friends, and it really forged, the adventures that I created with them. Really, I credit with creating my imagination and ability to storytell, as you said.
And get yourself out of trouble, it seems to me. And here's why. I mean, you got to, you had to get yourself out of trouble because the kids in your neighborhood were just trying to beat you up all the time. And I felt really, on one level, I felt like, back when I was growing up, which is far in advance of you, we used to play war, and we used to do all these crazy things that we were, in the backyards, where everybody had their backyards connected and that sort of thing. And you did some of the same things, but a lot of times you were just trying to get the hell out of there. Talk to me about your life in Bakersfield, if you may.
Yeah, excuse me, Bakersfield's an interesting, or at least, it was then. I haven't been there a while, but growing up then, it was just a very strange place, in the sense that, on one hand, it's a very much an agricultural, cowboy town. Bakersfield in California is like a city in Texas being in Bakersfield, or in California. The joke I make is that if Bakersfield and Austin switched places, then Texas and California would make more sense. Because Austin's like California and Texas, and Bakersfield's like Texas and California. Bakersfield's huge in the oil industry as well as agriculture, but it's also very much, kind of in the city. It's kind of, there's some really, really tough, bad areas. So growing up there, the easiest way I could describe it is I just never felt like I fit at all. And I mean, living there, I mean, being with my family, being with the friend groups, I always felt like a black sheep, and to a pretty serious degree. And so I always felt different. I always felt unaccepted. And so for me, a lot of it was turning inward to try and cope with that feeling of lack of belonging, and, quite frankly, the lack of acceptance.
Yeah. I mean, when you're running from the neighborhood bullies, you and your brother, you talk about free range kids. I mean, you guys walked around to stay out of your neighborhood for hours. I recall reading that in your book. And I just thought, can you imagine these days, any of these kids running around and for 8 hours a day, no lunch, no nothing, hoping that by the time you get back at dusk, those guys aren't going to kick your ass. Yeah.
The street light is saying, yeah, it was, we at that time, you'd go wherever there was, no cell phones, no anything like that. So I'd go to the restaurants and just hang around in a, Carl's Jr., and the girls sometimes would give me like a free French fry. I did that for,
nice.
There were some really cool girls there. That was, probably in their, late teens at that point, but it was, again, you look back at that time, and it wouldn't be accepted now, but at the time there was also a level of independence that you learned from having that freedom and having to figure things out on your own. The one thing that I feel very strongly about in the book is that, I think that, adversity and difficult circumstances when you're younger really is what creates your ability to solve complex problems later. People that have never figured things out on their own, when they were younger, they become dependent on other people, solving their problems for them. So I think there's a real advantage to growing up with some level of adversity.
You had adversity, you had independence. You didn't necessarily want those things at that time. Talk to me about your family unit. Who was in your family, and what were some of the things the dynamics in the family?
So, yeah, it was my mom, or my brother, who was 3 years younger, my dad and my mom. And For me, it's funny because when you grow up as a kid, you don't, you know what you know your family, and you don't really, you assume that's what kind of everyone's experiencing, just because it's what you know. The big thing for me growing up, the cause of probably the most difficult part was, my dad wasn't really, still is, an alcoholic, and he worked very, very hard. He was a heavy equipment mechanic, so he worked on like tractors and big, I guess tractors is the best way, but heavy machinery. And he worked in the field a lot. He had a field truck, so he was pretty much working overtime, a lot of overtime. And again, he worked very hard to provide, uh, for the family. But the negative side effect of that, obviously, was I very rarely saw him. And when I did see him, I mean, he yeah, was generally not in a sober mood. And I really didn't realize that. I thought all dads got home at whatever it was, 6 o'clock, but he started work at 5 and went to bed. That was what I assumed because dads work hard and that's what they do. I didn't really realize until years later that there was obviously a lot more to that. And so my mom also worked, went to school. So I just didn't have, parents. I used to come home from school and I'd be alone until they got home. And when they got home, there would usually be some form of conflict and then I would leave. So most of the time when in my childhood, I spent really kind of avoiding the family, for lack of a better term. And, again, I don't fault, my parents worked very hard to put a roof overhead and food on the table. So they did the best they could. And it just took me years. That being said, are there things from that environment that created certain issues in my life? Absolutely. And the way I like to say it to people is, any issues that you experienced in your childhood, a lot of people say, it wasn't my parents' fault. Well, it wasn't, but it definitely wasn't yours. It's not your fault it happened, but at this point, it is your responsibility. And I had to go through a level of accepting that kind of the things that molded me at that time weren't my fault that they happened, but they were now my responsibility on what I was going to do with that.
Yeah. I mean, when you've got those kinds of experiences, and your dad was like my father-in-law, he was a mean drunk. He took liberties, if you will, with his wife. I mean, he didn't remember. I mean, it was just like he gets violent and that sort of thing. And you weren't beaten, thank God. But how'd your little brother fare? He was on spectrum, if I read between the lines accurately.
Yeah. So yeah, he had every issue you could have as a child. I mean, he was just, uh, he was allergic to everything. He would, I'm going to say this and people are going to think I'm exaggerating, but I swear to you, it's true. He would only eat plain hot dogs, plain hamburgers, and pepperoni pizza. That's it.
For
And
his
candy,
whole
obviously. Like, I
candy,
honestly
the worst thing
don't think,
possible.
I don't think he has ever eaten a vegetable in his entire life. I'm not joking.
Uh-huh.
And, but he just had, food allergies, severe asthma, you name it. He, speech therapist, ADD, blah, blah, blah. And so for me, it was very difficult growing up with him. And obviously, I don't fault him for any of this, but he required so much attention that I fell into the role of trying to be the good kid who wasn't a moment's problem. And I did that. And my mom will tell you I wasn't. And again, though, I didn't, there's ramifications from that took me, decades to realize later in life. But it was a major point of conflict between my parents was dealing with him. He didn't want to go to school. He didn't, again, he would wake up sometimes and literally scream for 30, 45 minutes, just top of his lungs, just going bananas. And again, there was obviously something happening, in his in his brain and with him. But I mean, it was the 80s. There was no real treatment or awareness like there is now. So it was
Not until the late
just,
80s, I think.
yeah, it was just treated as a problem. And so again, I tried to kind of escape the conflict that naturally arose from that issue.
Yeah. There's this thing about, a father who has issues of his own, and then they have a kid who's not normal in some, I'm just taking liberties with that word, not normal, which happened to my husband's family too, my father-in-law. And it's just weird how that it has prepared my husband in amazing ways. His brother's deaf, so that caused initial problems, okay? And then my husband also talks about going and doing international business and how people of other languages, he would pick up certain cues. He would know what they were thinking, or by their gestures, even though it could have been an entirely different culture, he could tell what they were thinking, and they were always amazed. How did you know that? Well, it's I got a brother, and he couldn't talk, and he couldn't speak, and he couldn't sign at that point in time. So, I mean, I think all of that to say, in your experience, you said in your book, you always wanted to be a warrior of some sort. You wanted to be a knight. You wanted to be one of the good guys. And, I mean, don't you think that has informed the way you conduct your life in the best ways possible? I'm not taking the bad stuff because I read the book. So
there's a lot of that. Yeah, a lot of mistakes.
But how did it prepare you for the military?
Well, so I feel that again, that environment growing up, what I believe that, and I'm going to call it a pattern or a template or a mold, for lack of a better term. I feel like that kind of childhood chaos creates this feeling of wanting to save others, specifically, at least in my experience, and I think this is very common, children. And I think the subconscious intent is twofold. One, you want to save another child because your inner child couldn't save itself at the time because you were a kid. You didn't know what the hell you're doing, right? So I think it wants to save another version of itself as a mechanism for healing. That's the way I see it. In addition to that, there's just some level of cathartic, healing that I, because I see it's a pattern I see over and over and over. And the other part of it would be, I think that when you grow up, so you have a chaotic childhood, that instills a lack of self-worth. And the reason is because children are egocentric. They think they're responsible for their environment. A child knows that the environment they're in is, good or bad, conducive or not to safety. So I never felt safe. So I was like, well, I must be bad and worthless. And that's why my environment has no safety. I didn't have safety when I was out of the house, truly. And maybe when I was, I didn't have safety when I was in the house. So it wired me to feel unsafe most of the time. And what that created, I believe, is an innate need to search for value externally because you have no value internally. So you search for it externally, and a major way is conceptually, you go, if I was a hero, if I saved somebody, if I saved someone's life, if I pulled a person out of a burning building, if I, jumped in front of a bullet, whatever it is, then that would give me value. And it took me, again, decades to realize that so many things I was doing were actually so many things I was doing was actually searching for external value because I didn't have it internally. And so I think I call it hero syndrome. You aspire to be a hero as a mechanism for getting the value and the worth that you don't have internally.
You went on Sean Ryan's podcast, and I have told authors to go on, to watch that podcast, because I talk to spy thriller authors and stuff like that. And they may generally don't need anybody else's help because they're so talented themselves. But if you want live oral history, almost real time oral history about some of our warfighters and other people as well, you can do no better than to take a look at that podcast and find out what people are thinking. And you have done, as a result of going on 2 versions, have you done any others besides after the first 2 episodes that you did?
No, not of Sean's.
Oh,
no.
okay. Well,
yeah.
You did so much.
It was a long recording.
You guys were like 5 hours, 6 hours, something like that. And I listened to them all. I watched them all and all the hours. But the thing is that what I'm telling you is that you have done, because of this sort of milieu in which you were born and all that jazz, you did a lot of sussing out what it was in your heart and what was in your emotional, all this baggage you brought with you. And on that show, you did. You helped millions of people just by doing that. Millions and millions of people. And I want to revisit that in a second. And we will. But I first want to tell people, or I want you to tell people about your military life, because not everybody can say, yeah, I was in Delta. And so tell us how you got there.
Yeah. So, for me, again, not again, I haven't said this part yet, but I did say that I, as a kid, wanted to be in the military. I always gravitated towards, I'll tell you a funny story. I don't think I told this in the book, but it is pretty funny. So when I went into the military, the Army recruiter, first of all, people are like, why didn't you join the Navy? And I'm like, well, probably because I can't swim. That was odd.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I can't. Well, it's not that I can't swim. It's that I don't float. And floating is kind of important for swimming. But I went in the Army recruiter, and, we were talking about jobs. And he's like, well, and then I had to take what's called the ASVAB test. It's like a vocational test. I scored high enough where I could have done any job, literally any job the Army had. Didn't matter. And so the recruiter hands me, and I don't remember the number, but let's say it was like 230. It was like a list of like 230 jobs. And I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, well, what do you mean, like, jobs? And he goes, well, which job do you want to do? And I swear, I wasn't joking. I was like, well, there's only one job in the Army, and that's, being a fighter, a warrior, which is infantry, obviously. But I was like, what do you mean there's other jobs? I literally at that time didn't know that the Army or any of the military had hundreds of jobs. I thought it was
you just went to the recruiter. The recruiter didn't come to your high school or anything, right?
No, I literally.
Okay, so there were no lies or anything. You know how recruiters are.
My recruiter, don't even get me started. But I went to my recruiter. My recruiter at the time told me, he goes, "You are the easiest recruit I've ever had," because I just went in there and I'm like, I want to do this, and then I took the test, I passed, and then it was a pretty simple process. But I didn't think that there were jobs other than combat. It never even occurred to me. So for me as a child, I always gravitated, Vietnam was actually ended the year I was born. And so the 80s was a very heavy awareness, obviously, of Vietnam vets and certain experiences. And so the one movie, and there's many, don't get me wrong, but the one movie that defined kind of my childhood was First Blood. And then, Rambo 2 and Rambo 3, but First Blood was really, he was a Green Beret. And I think as a kid, when I was experiencing, bullying and isolation and just lack of self-worth, all these things, when I saw, Stallone as Rambo in First Blood, I was like, I want to be that. I don't want to be scared. I want to be feared. I want people to fear me. You know what I mean? I want people to respect me. I want all the things that he had, that character was. And it's going to sound crazy, but even, the PTSD that they show in First Blood, I thought that was intriguing and it looked almost cool to me, not bad. I mean, First Blood is an anti-war film, and yet I watched it and I wanted to be it. And I think I wanted to become it because I needed to build a protective character for myself that could protect myself, because I was very, I was very sad. I was very soft as a very sensitive kid. I thought too much, quite frankly. I overthought everything, which I was aware. I was thinking about things way more than other kids were thinking about certain things, like toilet papering a house. I'd be like, well, I don't want to do that. The old man he'll have to pick it up. And like that thought didn't
That'll make him mad.
Yeah. I was like, it'll be sad to watch him pick it up. And, I was overly sensitive. And so, I really just wanted to create this protective character, and the special operations, the Green Beret, the tough Green Beret, that was very attractive to me. So that was when I locked on to the special operations community, and specifically the Army, because of First Blood.
Wait, you just walked on? You can just do that?
No, I mean, sorry, locked on. That
was
locked
on. I thought it was like, whoa, because your Delta origin story is pretty interesting too. And that was, I mean, you worked your ass off. I'm not going to lie, but it was just like, you.
Well, when I went, I mean,
did a good job.
To that point, when I went to the recruiter, so I first of all was like, I want to do infantry, and I said, what is the hardest thing that you can guarantee me? Because as you said earlier, you got to be very careful with recruiters, and in your deal with the military it's a contract. It's a contract. It's a legal agreement. And so I knew somehow, I don't honestly know how I knew this, but I knew enough that I knew that I needed to get something guaranteed in writing. And so I went in there and I said, I want to be a Green Beret. I want to be Rambo. And they're like, at the time, they're like, we can't do that, because at the time they didn't have a guaranteed contract that would allow me to try out for Green Berets. But they were like, well, we do have a Ranger contract. And so I was like, okay, great. And I knew what Rangers were. I had a poster on my wall. So I was like, great, give me that. And that's what I did. In 2000, I believe they did actually change the contracts, and they did open up a Green Beret, what's called the 18 X-ray program, where you can get a straight pipeline contract to try out for special forces. But they didn't have that at the time. Yeah. It's, that being said, I'm glad that option, in hindsight, I'm glad that option wasn't available when I joined. And the reason is because what's awesome about Ranger Battalion, Ranger Regiment is it a special operations unit? Yes. But you start at the bottom. You go in there as a private. I went in there as an E1, the lowest rank you can possibly go. And so you learn from it's an elite infantry unit, and you basically learn all the basics of infantry combat. And a lot of people don't realize that super advanced, CQB cool, stuff is actually just advanced basic, infantry combat. It's advanced, but it's advancement of the basics. It's not something completely separate. And so going there, it was a great place to start and kind of learn. I still had to clean toilets, when I got there. And so I'm glad that I went through that humbling process of having to build up from zero, rather than starting, in a mid-tier. When you come out of training for 18 Extra, you're a sergeant. So you never really experience the, being the bottom of the barrel. So I'm glad I started where I did.
Yeah. So, and you were in for 10 years, right? Is that correct?
It's under that. I think it's like 9.
Oh, okay. So, and then
months, but it's around.
And you said, here's the quote I took off one of your interviews it wasn't the war I was hoping for. Eventually you arrived at this conclusion that wherever you were, which I think at that point, I think you're still in Afghanistan, or were you on Iraq? Because you deployed both places. And go ahead. Please.
Yeah, I'm assuming, it was probably Afghanistan, because I'm assuming then you're talking about going to the next place.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about sort of what you came to realize about yourself moving up the ranks, literally. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, kind of, it's worth mentioning because it's kind of funny. So my first job in Ranger Battalion was a, speaking of starting at the bottom, my first job was an assistant machine gunner, which is about as crappy of a job as you can get. Like I found I was going to be cool running in with, gun kicking doors. No, I was literally carrying about 100 pounds between ammunition and a tripod, T&E, spare bells. I didn't even have a rifle back then in the 90s. The AG didn't even carry a rifle. I had a M9 Beretta and, like I said, 70 pounds of ammo and 30 pounds of tripod and barrels. So, but again, it was very, quite frankly, humbling and humiliating to a degree to basically be, schlepping weight. But it taught me a lot. It taught me how to carry a lot of weight in a ruck and learn how to do it. And so I eventually, I don't know, after I think a year and a half, I became a sniper. I tried out for the sniper section in Ranger Battalion. I became a sniper. I loved that job. I still, it was an amazing job because sniping is one of those things that people think it's shooting. It's not. In the military, it's, you got to learn radio, you got to learn, stalking, building hide sites, doing, photography. There's a million skills that go along with that job. And so what I loved about the job is that it's really pretty much impossible to master. You could spend a lifetime and never be perfect at all of the different required skills. And so I loved that job. I became a sniper team leader. And then that's when we deployed to Afghanistan. So I deployed to Afghanistan in charge of a 3-man sniper team. And, it was a very interesting deployment. We had just, Anaconda had ended. We pushed out to the Pakistani border because that's where all the, Taliban had pushed. And we built the outstations that, everyone now, knows the Orengal Valley stuff, all the stuff along the Pak border was when we started building them, was on that deployment. So that was pretty cool. But then at that time, I had this experience, a couple experiences, but one in particular where I got to work with another more advanced unit, and they didn't have a sniper team for some missions they were doing. So they, said, hey, come along. And after that experience, I was just like, okay, I want to work with these guys. It was just everything that I had always dreamed of, for lack of a better term. And I just said to myself right then, I'm like, when I get back, I don't care. I don't care what happens. I'm going to put in a packet to try. You have to basically request to try out, if that makes sense. And I was just like, I'm going to do that. And I just made up my mind. And so when that deployment ended and we came back home, it was quite a bit of work even to apply. And I just went through the process, and it took a while. And finally I got accepted to try out. And, the one thing that I don't think a lot of people understand about the military is the military requires a lot of effort, and it's a lot of hard effort. But the one super positive thing about the military is that you have to put in the effort, but the requirements and the structure for how to do different things is very much laid out. You want to go to this unit? Cool. Do this. It's a laid out path. And yes, you have to do the effort, but the steps are known, and there's always in the military what's called a task condition standard. So you know what you need to do, why you need to do it, and you know what the standard is to complete it. And I mean, not getting too off top subject, but I want to say, I think a problem that a lot of veterans have when they get out is that they're fine with doing the effort no matter how hard it is. The problem is they have difficulty creating that structure and that task condition and standard for themselves. And it's almost a level of institutionalization that I feel kind of matches you see with prisoners and inmates and people who have been through prison. It's similar. And so for me, yes, it was that process to go to that unit was very difficult, but the positive was I just had to focus on the effort. I didn't have to create the grand structure of how it was going to happen. And so it was difficult, but it was such a rewarding path to go on. And I'm just, so lucky that I was able to go down it.
I mean, I know the military needs to have people doing these jobs, and ultimately it's going to be these jobs. And this is how you get there. You talk about the steps, but it surely would be a lot better if, when you're not in a state of war, that people can actually come up with the ideas for the steps to perform a function so that it forces them to think a little bit. It doesn't happen all the time, but I mean, it would be, it's just one of those things where you teach kids how to think, and they will always be able to do it like you did. For example, you said when you were a sniper, you said man, I can't believe I'm using algebra again. I mean, and you were called a nerd. You were a smart kid. It sounds like you had a lot of innate intelligence, and you just had such a low bout of self-esteem and self-worth that you didn't know how talented you were.
I mean, look, I'll my go-to self-deprecating, I'll turn against right now to say, yes, I definitely, school was both easy and difficult at the same time. It was very easy for me to pick up concepts, but it was very hard to, for lack of a better term, color within the lines of anything. And the way the system, especially at that time, worked, it really made me feel stupid. And so just because I was getting horrible grades, but it wasn't that I was actually not picking up on it. The way that the education went didn't work for me. And so it did take me years. For the longest time, I had two thoughts in my head at the same time, which is I'm smart and I'm stupid. And they both existed in my brain at the exact same time, both equally. And I could think each of them at different times. And it was really difficult for me to understand which one was the either accurate or at least more accurate reality. And just like you said, finally, after years later and understanding my core self-worth issue and where it came from, now I go, oh gosh, I was never stupid. You know what I mean? Like, oh man. And it's a good realization, but make no mistake, there's obviously a level of frustration where you go, gosh, where would I be today had I accepted that 30 years ago, 40 years ago? And, what I'll say to anyone that may be having or has just had or will have that revelation of not just with, intelligence, but anything about themselves, you can't go back, and all you can do is learn and move forward with it. And it's now I just have to remind myself that it really, that realization, what I've done with it is that realization that I didn't figure that out about myself. What I now have realized that I'm supposed to do with that is try and help others realize themselves that realization, which had I not been through it, I wouldn't be able to help others do that. And so that's kind of how I'm, for lack of a better term, justifying or coming to terms with having that realization so late, is I can use it now to try and help others come to that realization earlier.
I think it's wonderful. Okay, let's go back, because you're the sniper, and then you are given the green light to try out to go to the bigs, to go to the show. And because this isn't the war, it wasn't the war I was hoping for, is what you said. And so now what? So you get to try out for
Yeah. So you basically get accepted to try out, which it's like for lack of a better term, it's like a pre-screen. You kind of have to go through a pre-screening, which makes sense. So then I got the approval to go do the actual tryout, and I was just so excited. And I'm going to tell a story, and I don't remember if I put this part in the book, but it's I think it's a critical lesson. So if I didn't, I actually should have. But right before I went to the the course to try out, we had another the prior class before. We sent, I want to say 5, I could be wrong, but I believe it was 5 guys from my unit that I was currently in. And I mean, when I say 5 guys went, I don't mean 5 guys. I mean 5 of the biggest freaking studs that we had in my unit went. And none of them made it. And so I had, I mean, probably at least 20, if not more, people that were like, hey, dude, those guys didn't make it. Like, I would push your time, or maybe go next year, maybe, do some more weights or something. And they were just like, hey, and obviously they didn't say this directly, but obviously indirectly what they were saying was, hey, those dudes are absolute animals. They didn't make it. You're probably not going to make it.
Oh, sure.
And I remember,
you don't look like an apex predator to me, fella.
Yeah,
go back to the gym.
Yeah, they were like, hey, these guys were the best physical dudes we got, which was absolutely true. And I just remember saying to pretty much all of them, that has nothing to do with me. And it's not like I was thinking, I just remember thinking it just didn't matter to me. And to be perfectly honest, I don't really know why. I don't know why it didn't matter, but it just didn't matter. I just saw them as independent things. And I just remember thinking, like, they have nothing to do with me. Yes, they are, that sucks, because it would make me feel, I guess, a little bit better if they had, but I don't think it has anything to do with anything. And I'm just going to go give it a shot and see for myself. And I ended up, going, and I went straight up, with the intent of not making it. That was my intent. I mean, I'm going to do my best, obviously, but I didn't have any expectation. Truly, I didn't have any expectation. And in that course, which is, around a month long, I obviously can't go into detail about it, but it was very, very, very difficult. But I honestly had a really good time. There was just something, maybe it was just that I was pursuing my dream. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what it was. I was just so happy to be there that I had done all the work to get there, and I was there, and I was giving it my shot. And I just really, and most of your time there, I will say, most of your time there, or maybe not most, but a lot of the time there is spent on your own. Truly, like, alone. For me, that went back to my childhood. You know what I mean? That went right back to the how I grew up. And for me, it didn't feel, I didn't feel, strangely, because I did feel the isolation when I was alone when I was younger. But weirdly, when I was there and alone, I no longer felt isolated. I was out in the woods. It was beautiful. The weather sucked, but it was beautiful to be out on my own and be on my own. I mean, I was in my head, but I'd spent so much time there. It felt very familiar and very comfortable. And so I had a really great experience in general. There was moments of absolute misery, but in general, it's a great experience. And when I completed it and was selected at the end, I mean, I was kind of in shock, to be honest with you. I like I said, I really didn't have an expectation, but I was planning mentally everything I did. I was mentally going, okay, how would I do that better? If I had a day that I didn't do good, I'd sit down and go, why didn't I do good? And then I would write notes to myself and be like, okay, you need to fix this, this, and this. And for me, I was writing it for next time, but in reality, what ended up happening was those little notes to myself made me get better each day.
So you were in North Carolina. You went back to North Carolina for this training, correct? I mean, did they do it anywhere else, or
it's in a different location? It's north of, it's north of it's north of North Carolina. So it's not in North Carolina, but yeah, it's I'll say this, it's in what has to be some of the worst trained in the United States. It's got to be. It's horrible. I came out of it with, I had sores and wounds all over my body from, vines. And there's this thing called mountain laurel, which I mentioned in the book. It's like something out of a freaking Aliens movie. And it's very difficult terrain, but I'll say that it's got to be the worst in the US, but it's there for a very specific reason, and it's a very smart reason, because it's terrain that breaks you. That's the easiest way to say it.
Is this the place? Is this the last run or whatever that is? The place where they sort of dump you in some place and you have to make it back? Is that something else?
No, that's a way to describe it. Yeah, there's a version of that. Yeah, well, it's
no, Victoria, that's not actually what I'm talking about. No, and if I did tell you, I'd have to kill you.
No. It's a very, that's a way to describe it. It's a lot of walking, and a lot of running technically. But yeah, it's very much, you really need to. I'll say this, the one thing that you cannot do is start to question yourself. And I'm saying that because that applies, in my opinion, to everything. You have to, you're going to make mistakes. It's 100% going to happen. And when you make them, if you allow those mistakes to start spiraling you might as well just quit. Because there's no way that you're going to be able to overcome that mistake, correct it, and keep going how you need to go. And so there's a lot of, I'll say this, it is a lot of people don't understand why it is the way it is prior to going. They're like, well, what does this have to do with this job? And that's fair, because I thought the same thing. I was a little curious. Having done it, it makes complete sense. Not only does it make complete sense, but it is a certain level of absolute genius who created this whole thing. It's very impressive. And you really have to kind of experience it to understand the layers to it. But it's a great, it was an organization, again, that when I got to, finally after completing, and then, the next training was, much worse than that. But once I got there, I was finally in a place where I was like, okay, this is what I had dreamed of. This is what I had hoped for. The joke that I make is that very few things in the military are movie cool. You watch movies and, oh, it's movie cool. Then you get to the military and you go, there's not a lot of movie cool stuff here. Being there was daily stuff where I was like, this is movie cool. And obviously I'm thinking in movies because I'm a movie fanatic, but it was movie cool stuff every day. And I really didn't have a lot of complaints over anything.
So you deployed to Afghanistan. To Afghanistan when, as a member of the elite Delta Force, or what are we calling them?
That was Iraq. So I went to Afghanistan as a teacher, and then Iraq had started, which I really messed up the timing on that. I didn't think Iraq was going to happen. I was like, that's it. There's no way. We're in Afghanistan. Like, they're going to start another war. Yes, that is exactly what's going to happen. So I was very wrong on that. And then Iraq had started, and obviously, we know where Iraq went. And then obviously, Iraq was super, super intense and heavy, and Afghanistan was dead and nothing was going on. And then boom, Iraq pretty much ends and Afghanistan, heats up again. It's,
Yeah.
well,
you were in the first Battle of Fallujah with the Marines. That was a hellscape.
Well, I was in Fallujah. So it depends on how you define it. There was an invasion that the Marines did that I was not a part of. The invasion that I think they actually might have done two, now that I think about it. I was in Fallujah when, there was battles going on, but it wasn't the full invasion when the Marines rolled through. I was in Fallujah when the Marines it was surrounded, and there was, stuff obviously going on. It was a very interesting time in Fallujah because, there was just no rules. I don't know how to say it. It was like World War II. We were blowing up buildings with aircraft. It was just Fallujah. What I saw in Fallujah to me was like a
very liberal ROE.
Oh, very, yes. And again, I know the situation pretty good at that time. I understand why the ROE was what it was, but it was it was for lack of a better term, a total war. It was blowing up, the city, and it was everyone was bad. And it was pretty crazy. And so for me, that was growing up with watching World War II stuff and Vietnam stuff, in Fallujah, seeing kind of the, grenade launchers and stuff just wasn't really happening in Baghdad. It was interesting to see war on that scale, with Abrams tanks and things like that, as opposed to, walking as a sniper team in the video, or in the mountains of Afghanistan.
Yeah. And then then eventually you went to Iraq, and then that's when you got hurt.
The Iraq was the prevailing deployment during that. Actually, we weren't even going to Afghanistan at that time at all. It was just Iraq. And, when I eventually got blown up there, it was, we were mostly in Baghdad that time, although we pretty much bounced all over I pretty much went to most parts of Iraq at some point for some mission or the other. And it was just, here's an interesting story. I was in, 2 days ago, I was in an Uber, and the driver had an accent, and I was like, kind of sounds familiar. And it's like, where are you from? And he's like, Iraq. I was like, really? I'm like, where? And he's like, Baghdad. Really? Yeah, well, yeah, no, but it was funny because I was like, yeah, actually, I've been to Iraq. And he's like, kind of looked at me like, huh? And, and actually I said, when he said he was from Iraq, I was like, Minayanta, Iraq, which means where are you from in Iraq? Because I knew I remember very small pieces of it. And then that was when he was Baghdad. And so it was funny because he goes, where you were in the military? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, where were you at? Fallujah? And it's like,
whoa,
funny for a part of it. Yeah. But it was, Iraq was, it was a lot of fun, quite frankly. And again, I know that may sound strange, but I was very lucky to be in the unit I was with, because I was surrounded by people that were better than me, that were people I looked up to. And on top of that, we were, we were extremely lucky in the sense that our job was to attack bad guys at their house. So we're not driving around, which we did do this in Fallujah, which was very dangerous, but we weren't driving around in the daytime, generally, doing IED clearance. We would get a briefing and we would be, hey, we're going to go after this guy. This is why we're going after him. This is what he's done. This is what he's trying to do, whatever it was. And so that led to very much a sense of job satisfaction and purpose, because you knew what you were doing, you knew why you were doing it, and you knew how it related to the bigger war effort. You're going to go after this guy because he's blowing up these people. And you go, okay, like, cool.
Right.
So
get that bastard.
Yeah, but knowing why you're doing what you're doing is so important. And the reason I'm saying I was so lucky is a lot of, people in the military, when you're at the, the lower rank levels, you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. You're driving down the road, you have no idea exactly why. The commanders do, or, the officers do. You don't know how it relates to the overall, battle space and the war. So I was very lucky in that I was in a place where we had very definitive purpose, and it led to a sense of job satisfaction, because we knew we were going after bad people, and we were generally going after bad people that had attacked our people. So it was like, okay, now we're taking it to them. And so it was just and when I say, I had fun, that's why, is because it felt like we were getting back at people who had, again, in my wanting to be a hero sense of help people, I knew how I was going to be doing that. I knew what I was doing was, helping people that couldn't necessarily help themselves when they got blown up by this guy. But now I'm going to take them out and prevent them from doing it to others.
Yep. You also did some hostage rescues and stuff like that, right?
No, I didn't. Well, we did hostage rescue missions. So there was a very famous hostage rescue mission that unfortunately I missed because I was in Fallujah. So we did several hostage rescue missions, but it's very, very rare for the hostages, to be there. And first, so that, yeah, well, look at the situation in Israel. They move them all the time. I mean, I get it, because that, people are going to see them. They're going to report it. It's going to make their way up. So they have to move them pretty much all the time. And obviously, in Iraq, it was, the same situation. And so we would quite often get missions from Intel that were hostage rescues, but it's very exceedingly rare. I'd say one out of maybe 100. I'm making up numbers, but probably one out of 100 would lead to actual hostages being at the location at the time that it's assaulted.
Eventually, since I know I'm closing in on the time that you've graciously given us, you get hurt. You got time? You got a little extra time? Because I'd love that. Okay. That's awesome. Well, the reason I was asking about hostage rescues and that sort of thing, I've had hostage negotiations on my mind recently, partially because of the Israel thing and that sort of thing. But, I read a book a million years ago and had the author on, and, it's just one of the observations he's made. And I just wanted to hear it from somebody who's an expert on it. And that was, hey, the first thing you do to negotiate with, and this is the negotiator, different than rescue, I suppose. But the first thing you do is make sure there are no new hostages taken. That's your first job. That's job one. Job two, and way down the line, is to try to get those other people back. It's not the top priority, which is really sad. Does that comport with what your experience has been or what you've heard?
Well, so for a hostage rescue unit, which is what I was in, it's interesting, because in a hostage rescue unit, obviously the first thing they do is, a negotiator would be brought in to negotiate a exchange, or whatever they want. Who knows? And what's interesting about a hostage rescue unit is that the and this would be true for, a military unit. It would be the same for the FBI HRT, which is the hostage rescue team. It would be the same for a local SWAT team doing it, with a criminal or in domestic soil. And so what people, the way it works is that if you get sent in, and this is a huge misconception, but if you get sent in, the only time that they will send in a hostage rescue unit is when negotiations have broken down to the point where they're like, they're going to kill them. They're going to kill them. The negotiations have broken down. We feel that nothing more can be done on the negotiation side. They're going to kill them. And where I'm going with that is because once they send a hostage rescue unit in, and I don't care if it's military, federal law enforcement, or local law enforcement, or international counter-terror or hostage rescue for that matter, there is no possible way. I don't care what anyone says. I did the job for a while. There's no possible way that there is any technique or tactic that currently exists, at least that I know of, that will allow you to rescue the hostages without the serious, and I mean serious possibility of losing at least one, if not all of them. And the point that the reason I'm saying that is the way the job works is if they send you in, there's an expectation that we're going to lose all of them. And they're sending you in so that we save some of them, with the other expectation of we're going to lose some of our hostage rescue team. So it's essentially trading some of the team for some of the hostages. And there's just no way possible to do it any other way. And so that's why hostage rescue missions are so rare overall, is because it's not going to work out great. You look at one of the most famous ones, which would be the Iranian embassy in 1980 with the SAS, and that was just a resounding success for many reasons. But still, one hostage died. Which again wasn't the SAS's fault at all. But my point being is, as amazing as that operation was, and as successful as it was, and it's really almost a template of success, you still lost one hostage. And so it's very, 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 very difficult. And so when you talk about negotiations, back to your original question, I think, kind of the reason that they're trying to limit additional hostages is because it is such a bargaining chip that even if you have an assault team and you have them there, the weight is disproportionately on the side of the hostage takers. And so you want to prevent them gaining more leverage. And it's just a horrible situation. I don't know how else to say it, but it's something that I fundamentally disagree with, hostage taking. But being a kind of a lifelong person who studied tactics, I get it. I get why they do it. I don't agree with it, but I get why they do it, if that makes sense. Like it's just like people would say to me all the time about, IEDs in Iraq or Afghanistan. And I lost a good friend to an IED in Afghanistan. And people are like, man, IEDs they're BS. It's a cheap, it's a weak, tactic for horrible people. And I just go, look, man, let's be honest though, Spectre gunship flying at freaking, 30,000 feet and basically seeing them on thermal and hitting a 105 round and nuking 30 people. That's not exactly a straight up fight. If you're talking about like an honorable fight here, we gotta just accept that war is very dirty, and they're using their tactics that work for them, and we're using our tactics that work for us. And I think it's to some degree a little hypocritical, in my opinion, for us to start judging, what others do in a wartime environment, because there are ultimately no rules.
So that kind of logic for you, I mean, I hear, the brass always say, we want an uneven fight. We want an unfair fight. We want to have maximum, we want to be the badasses of the badasses, overwhelming force. So I get that, but has that mentality, your logic of, hey, it's like, suicide bombers are not cowards, and, people who use these IEDs are doing it because there's probably not a hell of a lot they can use. They don't have a lot, and, they want to create maximum harm. And so anyway, does that make it into any of the programs you've worked on and the scripts that you've been a part of? And I'm just kind of curious. You dealt with the SEAL team show, and I think that's it's pretty interesting. And we have an Army Special Forces guy helping out with the SEAL team show.
Yeah. I'll get crap for that probably for the rest of my life.
Oh yes, I'm sure you will.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure there was one episode where I remember talking a little bit about with the writers about suicide bombers. I don't remember the episode well enough to remember what I said, but to your point, I'll say this: the I learned quite a bit about suicide bombers. Dealing with them firsthand, as well as dealing with the VBIED makers who were making the bombs. And what I learned about suicide bombers, it kind of shocked me, to be honest with you, because prior to, I had this mentality of they're these absolute fanatics who will do anything for their cause, like Japanese kamikaze pilots in World War II. Their dedication to it'd be the Japanese, emperor at that time. But what I actually learned firsthand is that that's not accurate. Suicide bombers, in my experience, are by and large, and again, there's exceptions to everything, but by and large, they are young, naive, for lack of a better term, kids who are lonely, don't have any real options or prospects, and are then very heavily manipulated by the facilitators. It shocked me. It shocked me to hear what the facilitators would say about the actual bombers. They had no respect for them.
Yeah.
They were cannon fodder to them. They were
totally. Were they drugged? They were drugged too. I mean, at least
any that I dealt with firsthand that I know of, but I'll tell you this: quite a few chicken out and don't do it. And the VBID makers that we were dealing with at the time all built in a remote switch, and if the person didn't do it, they would do it. And that happened way more than I assumed it did. And so dealing with the suicide bombers firsthand, my expectation was completely different. And I, to a degree, I felt sorry for the level of manipulation and kind of just the lack of, you just see it differently. I don't know how else to say it, but you really see that the facilitators, there's a heavy level of brainwashing and manipulation and promises, and it's a really sad environment. And so I think we need to, at some point, I probably will put in a script somewhere where I put the narrative a little bit more accurate to what I've seen. And again, not that it's not obviously bad what they're doing. It is, no question, but it's definitely different than I expected.
I just remember a friend of mine who was over at the Second Battle of Fallujah, that was 2007, was it? Was Operation Phantom Fury. It was at 04. There was one in 04, which is, you were there. And then 07. And then he noticed that, first of all, he said that there were the Chai boys. Do you talk about not wanting to see children victimized? And that just disturbed him no end. And then the other thing is that the drugs. He says all those guys were just hepped up. I mean, he was just shocked. So maybe.
I mean, I'm sure it happened. Again, it wasn't something I saw firsthand, but I'm absolutely have no doubt that it did happen. Absolutely no doubt. Maybe it was also at that time when I was seeing it, it just, maybe it wasn't being done then, and maybe it was done later. I don't know. But I have, based on what I know that they said and their mentality of how they treat them, I have absolutely no doubt it just wasn't something I personally saw firsthand. But we also weren't running around with drug tests, back then. So, they could have been. I just didn't know.
I know it's just sort of like cops with PCP back in the 80s and that sort of thing. Excuse me. But, like after the Hamas attack on Israel, I just read, excuse me, Vince Flynn book about, by Kyle Mills, who's a pretty cool dude. And he was talking about Captagon. And I went, oh my God, I thought Captagon was fake. It was actually real. And all the Hamas D-bags were, on that stuff. Just removes your sense of propriety and your sense of right and wrong. So.
I mean, there's a lot of, you look at something like, Germany in World War II.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it just came out, whatever it was with I think the book was called Bliss or whatever it was.
Yes, yes. Yeah, they're all meth. They're all tweakers.
And severely.
What the heck, man?
My kind of point being, though, is I'm like, how did this come out in 2000, let's just say 10? I'm like, the war ended in 45. Like,
right.
How was this not known? It's pretty significant. And
yeah, agreed.
Drug use, I'll tell you this is a 100% true story. When I was in 2014, I went to, it's one of the craziest trips I've ever done. I went to Normandy for this 70th anniversary, 2014, and 70th anniversary to the day. And I was on the beach in Normandy on June 6th. And there were multiple, I don't know how many, let's say 30, I forget, Normandy Raiders there, that they were in their 90s mostly. And I talked to, I don't know, probably 10 of them. I'm not sure. But one guy in particular that I talked to, I was asking him about storming the beach and how they did it. And he goes, we were drunk.
Yeah, I don't blame him. That was a suicide mission.
And he goes, yeah, we were drinking. He's like, the Higgins boat, right? He goes, first of all, we had to cross the English Channel on the big boats. And then we had to, he was kind of going through the logistics. And I forget how long it took, but it was quite a long time. And the seas were very rough and very miserable. And he was like, yeah, we were drinking the whole time. And I was like, I was like, oh man, I never even thought of it. And it was just so interesting to hear those guys' stories and just talk to them about how they did it and how it affected their lives. And it was the most amazing trip I've ever gone on in my life.
I've been to Normandy, and
it's mind-boggling.
We didn't get to talk to anybody, but it was we went to Normandy and just saw the lay of the land. And I think even though you may not be able to talk to people like you got to do, and that's a great thing, because I'm sure it meant much more to you than it would to me in terms of tactics and that sort of thing. But just being there, seeing how tight everything was, how did they get up those cliffs? I mean, man.
Oh, yeah.
Where were they were shooting down on them. And, I mean,
Well, to your point, though, the reverse of that is, I know infantry tactics, so I'm going in all the bunkers. I'm looking at how they're designed.
Yes, we were too.
Yeah, I'm like, this is really smart. I mean, the Germans were smart on how they engineered those bunkers. But the other point was I was a machine gunner, and I was my original job, as I said earlier, and I forget what the number was, but somehow they had some statistics on the rounds that the German machine gunners in the bunkers were going through. And it was unbelievable. Well, I was like, knowing what I knew about machine guns, I'm like, they had to have melted 100 barrels. And the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about the Germans on the Atlantic Wall along the French coast, they were never supposed to win. They were supposed to hold them off and then leave and let them arrive and then counterattack with their back to the ocean and decimate the assault force. That was the intent. But my point being is, you know how many Higgins boats there were? And the guy actually told me this. Thousands. There was like 5,000. I forget the exact number, but there was like 5,000 Higgins boats. And one of the Normandy guys told me, he goes, I remember landing on the beach and looking back, and he was like, I was scared. But when I looked back and I saw 5,000 boats, I was like, okay, like everyone's coming. Like, you know what I mean? And he's like, that gave me the courage to go on. But my point that I'm making about the Germans is, imagine being a German machine gunner in a bunker. Yeah, you may shoot one guy, two guys, you might shoot 100 guys. But at a certain point, there's 5,000 boats coming. And when they finally overtake your bunker, and they will, they're going to be pissed. And just in the grand scheme of warrior stuff, those Germans to be able to sit there and freaking fight 5,000 boats, I mean, that's insanity. Like, it's just, you know, both sides had incredible, just the level of courage to just sit there and on both sides, you know, one to storm and one to just sit and let that assault keep coming. It's just unbelievable. There's
Didn't
no
eventually they move back? The Germans moved back a little bit. Yes? No? My husband knows all this stuff.
Kind of. There was a lot of problems that happened with D-Day on the German side. Hitler was asleep. I mean, it was a lot of problems. Probably recovering from a bunch of meth. And so the counterattack took forever to happen, and it was disjointed, a lot of problems. But the Germans eventually did, yes, you know, lose the beach and push back, but they never really got the reinforcements for the counterattack like they were supposed to. So
gotcha. Oh, that must have been it.
So we're not speaking German. So
you know, we stayed in a little city. Why am I forgetting the name of the town? I'll think of it. And at the Sir Winston Churchill Hotel, and this was just after the 80th anniversary, I think it was, and you know, American flags, Canadian flags, British flags.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah, it's just the nicest thing ever.
Yeah, there's no equivalent like it in the U.S. You know, it's like it's the way I explain it. June 6th in, you know, around Normandy, at least, because that's where I was, is like the 4th of July for another country combined with Halloween. Yeah. Because they dress up and they drive tanks. It's bananas. I highly recommend going. I highly
recommend it too.
And Normandy is in Paris. You know, it's a very
beautiful
small village. It's very beautiful.
Great.
Yeah,
it's wonderful. It's better than Paris.
Yeah,
I mean, if you want a real French experience, go there.
French village. Yeah, French villages are pretty cool. Yeah.
Did you go to what is it? Mont Saint Michel, Mont Michel?
Yeah. Saint Michel.
It's gorgeous.
Saint Miraglisse.
What is it? The big hill.
Went to that one too. It's where the parachutist landed on, I believe, the church. I'm so sorry, but I have to. Now I actually do have to go because my Uber just got here. It's all good. It's all good. I could talk to you all day.
I could talk to you all day too. And what I will say is that you all of these wonderful experiences you've had post your deployments and the good times you did with your buddies there as well. Someday I'd like to talk with you about the pullout of Afghanistan. Another thing I'd like to say is that you saved a bunch of people's lives with your observations about how PTSD isn't really PTSD and how it's other things. And I was moved by that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's it's obviously in the book, it breaks it down, but the short version is, I think the thing that they're telling us is the disease is really just a symptom. And the reason things are not getting better is because we're not addressing the core disease. We're merely treating the symptoms. And to get real healing, you have to figure out what the disease and then treat it, because no amount of treating symptoms will ever cure you. And really, my book, if there's one thing that I feel that it tries to do, it tries to break down what the disease was for me, so I can help others hopefully find what it may be for them.
Forged in Chaos, Tyler Gray, the author, co-author, Lauren Ungeldy, and it's a magnum opus, I think, for you. You've helped many, many people, and
well, thank you. Hopefully, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen. And give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1A Cast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.